started in just a moment. Before we dive into today's topic, I have just a few quick housekeeping items to cover. Recording, yes, we are recording today's session and we'll be sending out an email with a link to the recording. Q&A, if you have any questions along the way, please drop them into the Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen. We've set aside some time at the very end of the presentation to answer as many as we can. All right, let's get into it. Today, we are discussing how AI is rapidly shifting the digital landscape. We'll be looking at the new challenges out there and, more importantly, the practical steps we can take to confidently manage these risks, protect your businesses, and build resilient teams. Guiding us through this today is Tim Orchard, CTO here at Cydea. Tim is going to break down how we can measure these new risks and stay one step ahead. Tim, thank you for being here. I'll hand the virtual mic over to you.
Thank you very much, Ariana, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out to join our webinar this morning. It's really appreciated. So, as Ariana says, I'm Tim Orchard. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Cydea, and I'm going to spend the next half an hour or so talking to you about how to think about the types of cyber risks that come from AI, and also, more importantly, how to quantify them and why that would be a useful and important thing for your businesses. So, but first, before we get into the main content, just a little bit about Cydea in case you're not super familiar with us. We are a British-based company who are all about helping our customers make better cyber security decisions. We do that through a number of different means. We have a fairly successful consultancy business, and we also have a SaaS security product around helping people quantify and manage their cyber risk. Everything we do revolves around an ethos in positive security. We're trying very hard to be the antithesis of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And what do we mean by that more concretely? It's about bringing data and perspective and real-world insights, cyber breach intelligence, risk intelligence, into helping our customers understand the problems that they face and do something proportionately about it. We work with a range of companies across the UK and the rest of the world at the moment, mostly around helping companies that have a specific need to do something a bit more concrete about managing cyber risk than getting an initial view on a spreadsheet. This can kind of range from helping do risk assessments, helping people with their compliance programs, doing security transformation, helping people in the aftermath of incidents rebuild a security program. And we also do a lot of work with private equity companies around helping them secure their portfolio as part of their value creation process. But enough about Cydea. Let's get on to the main topic of the day. So I'm going to kind of cover four areas in this webinar. Talk a little bit about cyber incidents to set the scene, AI cyber governance and what does that mean, and where and when should you start thinking about governance with regards to AI. I'm going to talk about a number of key AI cyber risks that we've identified through working with our clients and through the work that our consultancy business does. And then I'm going to talk you through how you can bring a financial perspective onto those risks by using a cyber risk quantification method. So hopefully that all sounds interesting and that you're in the right place. Without further ado, let's start with talking about AI cyber incidents. I guess so. You know, there's a lot of hype about AI. There's a lot of hype about how AI will both make the world a better place and destroy it at the same time. Putting that into a bit of perspective around the types of incidents that are actually happening today in AI. There's a number of different reports and sources that you can go to reference this kind of thing. One of the best ones, obviously, is the IBM Cost of a Data Breach report, which hopefully most of you are familiar with. You know, the picture here is that there are an increasing number of cyber breaches that are either involving AI or being facilitated by AI. You know, 1 in 6 is a pretty significant number for a technology that's only been around for about 7 or 8 years. There's also, you know, an increasing amount of AI within the software supply chain. Most of your suppliers, major suppliers, will probably be incorporating AI into their products, or are thinking about doing that. Third-party supplier risk is a pretty hot topic at the moment. AI is a significant proponent of that, as people rush to very quickly put AI into their products. It's not just your organization that you need to worry about the risk of putting AI in too quickly. It's all of the organizations that form part of your software supply chain as well, that maybe you have a limited amount of control over what that actually might mean. And I think one of the most interesting stats that we found in the IBM report is that about $670,000, over £500,000, is being added to the average cost of a breach involving shadow AI. And one of the kind of takeaways when we've dug into that a bit further is really about the ease with which AI can facilitate finding information much more quickly and much more comprehensively from an organization, particularly when you're using the AI to actually go and dig out that information for you inside an organization, whether it's something you've deployed as an attacker or whether it's using the organization's AI against it. And more on that later. So I guess key takeaway from this: AI cyber incidents are definitely real. They're definitely on the rise. And one of the kind of key insights that we got from the report was that over 2/3 of breach organizations are stating a lack of AI governance policies as being one of the kind of facilitators of why they are being breached in this way. So it paints an interesting and real picture that we probably should be considering AI cyber risks in nearly every organization's risk assessments at the moment. So with that in mind, if AI governance policies are the problem, what are the areas that are being cited in terms of a gap in effective AI governance? These are just 6 of the kind of key ones that we've pulled out from a combination of the IBM and other reports. Unsurprisingly, shadow AI is everywhere. Most people's personal and business feeds from LinkedIn and Instagram and others are absolutely full of the usefulness of AI and why everybody should be adopting it to help them do their job for them. Proliferation of shadow AI is not really a surprise. There's a lack of ownership of AI within organizations, and who owns the AI, who owns the data that goes in it, who owns the tooling that the AI is using. As AI grows to incorporate much more ability to interact with other applications within your ecosystem, ownership of that process is something that's often quite lacking and is a real problem, particularly with AI facilitated cyber attacks fitting within the gaps between those things. Low visibility of what AI is doing. What's the data going in and out? What are the blind spots? There are quite a lot. If you're not instrumenting all of your employees and your SaaS application AI usage, access control, obviously, policy, and obviously the pace of change outrunning policy. But these are all things that probably sit on a long list of governance things in other topics other than AI at the moment. But before you can figure out exactly what to do about these different things, one of the things that you should be doing is, rather than kind of running into what controls do I need to apply around preventing shadow AI, or what controls do I need to put in place to make sure that the tools that my AI are using are effective, is kind of taking a step back and understanding, well, what are the risks? Compliance is great, governance is great, but it can leave gaps if you're not thinking about that top-down approach to, what is the perspective of these risks within my business? What are the risks in the first place? And then marrying controls to that. There's nothing wrong with taking a bottom-up approach as well, but if you're just following best practice or a particular standard, no matter how good it is, there will still be gaps, and you may or may not over or under invest in what you're doing. So at Cydea, we would definitely promote that before you try and tackle the problem is think about the risks, and try and put a bit of a wrap around those in the context of your own organization. So let's do that now. So the 4 that I'm going to talk about in the time that we've got in this presentation, which kind of cover at a macro level most of the kind of main risks that we see our customers facing at the moment in terms of AI, are really AI-driven cyber attack, internal or shadow AI data leakage. This is the one that's got probably the most press over the course of the last couple of years or so. Everybody uploading all of their sensitive data into ChatGPT or Gemini or now Claude Code. And then the other two that I've kind of alluded to that I think are possibly just as important, if not more existential, if manifesting within most larger organizations, which is, compromise of the AI that you've put into your customer facing applications, or a compromise of the AI that sits within the key part of your particular supply chain. And we're going to kind of go through each one of these and the types of things that you need to think about to quantify the risk in this space. We're also going to kind of frame this with a couple of examples. It's very good to kind of anchor this kind of stuff in real world examples, whether you're thinking about the risk and how it relates to you, or whether you're communicating it back to your internal stakeholders to kind of help make the point that, yes, this is a real risk that we should be doing something about. So the first one, AI-driven cyber attack. I've got two examples here to kind of double click on that come from a different perspective on what this might mean. And, there's quite a broad number of ways that you can use AI to facilitate cyber attacks at the moment. I think one of them that gets discussed a lot that I haven't included as an example here would be really about AI generating phishing emails and just how easy it is to create more realistic phishing emails and do phishing campaigns at scale. That's great, and that's important as well. But the two I kind of like to kind of highlight here and provide also useful context to AI-driven cyber attacks would be the first one being around Arup. So Arup were subjected to a deepfake attack using AI to generate videos and video conferencing. They faked the CFO, they faked employees, and they used those on video conferencing software to steal quite a significant amount of money, $25 million. So, phishing is just the tip of the iceberg. Video phishing, I guess, is the state of the art. Thinking about, if you can put generative AI realistically on a video conference and can convince somebody that you are a real person, maybe this is something, if you're relying on that kind of thing to make decisions, if you're working in a large distributed organization where you might not know all of the employees, it's something really important to start thinking about, that it's not just email that you want to think about, CEO kind of business email fraud and compromise. All of the other kind of communication channels are important too. Video, Slack, maybe embedded messaging within your Salesforce application. How can AI facilitate making a much more realistic claim that they're your employee and they want money? So there's one. Another one, Singularity. Singularity is kind of called out a lot as a kind of software supply chain compromise that happened last year. This was really about a package manager that had been compromised, and all of the organizations using that package manager to deploy code were potentially compromised through that attack. What people maybe don't know quite so much about is that in that attack, not only did it use the package manager to gain access to the GitHub code repositories of the organizations that it compromised, but it was also leveraging AI within those organizations to find the secrets and find the data that it wanted to exfiltrate. So, if you're hooking up AI internally, which it's not necessarily a bad thing, but thinking about how an attacker might leverage your own AI against you in a cyber attack situation is something that not a lot of people have been considering, and isn't getting maybe as much press as some of the other types of attacks that we've seen. So it's not just tools developed by the attacker like deepfakes or automated exploit finding applications. It's also how AI within your organization can be used against you. That's something that's really important to consider in this category of cyber risk. So thinking about how would you quantify this? I mean, you first start thinking about if I'm looking at AI facilitated cyber attack, is this one risk? Does it make sense to my organization to have one meta risk to make decisions around, or should I be breaking it down? Should I be breaking down the use of my own AI against me into a separate risk? Should I be just breaking down the external attacker using AI to go faster and deeper and get more impact? I mean, that's entirely up to you, but this is the kind of thought process. What we would kind of advocate for at Cydea is that, you know, you should break down these risks to a level that makes sense to your organization, the differences in the components of your organization that make sense to a granularity that would help you make distinct decisions on what to do about these risks later. What you probably shouldn't be doing is making 100 different sub risks in a category if every treatment is going to be moderately the same, and you're not going to get a demonstrable return on the time it would take you to break that risk down to the nth level, if it's really just about making an investment case for, you know, 2 or 3 key security controls that you want to do. So, you know, that's the kind of things you want to consider. In terms of how would you quantify it, from an impact perspective, it's about what's the disruption to your business, what's the cost of stealing the data, what's the reputational impact to your business of having this kind of breach, and starting to think about, can I put some numbers around those? Business disruption being your inability to sell or to collect revenue for a period of time. Information theft, obviously, a lot of organizations and countries, data commissioners like in the UK, publish the amounts of fines per record, or there's data out there about average fine. These are the kinds of things that you would start to pull together to form that kind of basis of impact quantification. And in terms of likelihood, well, ideally, for all of these risks, and we'll kind of come back to it at the end, you should be thinking about the best data is your incident data, so real incidents and near misses, possibly, and hopefully you haven't had those kinds of incidents internally yet. So if you haven't had them, it's about looking at incidents out there in the wider world. There's a ton of work done by people like Verizon and IBM, and even analysts like Gartner and Forrester around, you know, what's the state of the world in this risk. So if you don't have your own data, the best proxy is looking at statistics from the wider world and trying to build that picture. When we're quantifying this or other risks, what you're trying to do is create a broad view of likelihood and impact that you can refine over time as you get better data, rather than trying to be 100% accurate to start with. And again, I'll show you a little bit how we do that when we work through an example at the end. But this is AI-driven cyber attack. Moving on to the next risk scenario. So internal and shadow AI data leakage. The 2 examples that I've got here to kind of help frame it from different perspectives. There was a large healthcare organization that had rushed quite quickly to develop its own internal chatbot to really help its employees better manage healthcare claims. Unfortunately, they left the door open, and the chatbot was on the internet. It was much more of a demo proof of concept tool. It leaked out onto the internet. As a result, had really poor authentication, you know, standard application security issues with it, that led external people to find it and then exploit it and start to pull out data that wasn't meant for public consumption. So this is a classic example of an internal tool being misconfigured and leaving the door open for people who were not intended to be able to access that tool. Another perspective on this is much more around shadow AI. You know, most people hopefully who've been tracking AI cyber risks would be familiar with this, although there are many articles. So just picking on Samsung because it's quite a popular one. Samsung employees were uploading code into ChatGPT to obviously help them develop better applications. ChatGPT was a non-sanctioned application. You're not paying for they weren't paying for ChatGPT. That code was being used in model training, and obviously that's a really bad idea. But similarly, any employee using any shadow AI that's not licensed and controlled by you, clearly you want to be thinking about what are the implications of the data they're putting in there. Should you be restricting it? Should you be restricting the data? AI data leakage is probably the most common low impact AI cyber risk that we're helping our clients with at the moment, but high propensity for this to be happening on a regular basis, particularly when you as an organization haven't picked and implemented the AI tools that your employees want to use and steered them towards what good looks like. Everybody wants a bit of a hand from AI, but if they don't have a route to do that, then they'll find cracks within your organization and try and find some way to help them better facilitate their work. So, again, two different examples from two slightly different perspectives. The thought process to think about how you might quantify them. Again, how far do you want to break this down? Are these really AI cyber risks that you want to break out? A lot of AI risks like this are about data loss. So is it important to you to be looking at the impact of AI on this separately to other data loss risks that you're looking to quantify and put on your risk register? Is the impact and the things that you would do about it different? These are the kinds of things that I would be thinking about in terms of how I would frame this as a discrete risk at all, or break it down to a certain level. The typical impacts that you would find from this, obviously, there's fines for data loss. There's loss of future revenue, business value for losing IPR. So it's not just sensitive data you should be thinking about. IPR and that kind of thing it can be equally important depending on the types of things that your business does. And obviously there's a reputational impact to these kinds of breaches as well if it becomes well known. So the next scenario that we're going to talk a bit through is compromise of customer facing AI. So in this, the examples that we've got to kind of give a bit of food for thought for you guys listening to this. Firstly, there's Lenovo built a customer chatbot. A lot of organizations at the moment, their first customer facing implementation of AI is actually a chatbot. So it's directly internet facing. It doesn't require any kind of authentication possibly to get into. It's designed there to help your customers better get the support and advice that they need rather than searching through knowledge bases. Lenovo sadly fell foul to a whole load of pretty standard web application security vulnerabilities. So these weren't specific AI vulnerabilities like model poisoning and being able to facilitate system commands through bad guardrails in the AI. This was basic cross-site scripting and other standard web application security vulnerabilities. However, the significance of that was that attackers can actually gain access via the chatbot to the customer support systems that sat behind it, using just malicious prompting, and we're able to get access to Lenovo customer support data, which is pretty bad. And again, is this just another example of an application security breach? The types of security controls, the rigor in the development process of this application isn't demonstrably different to a non-AI application. It just happens to be the use of AI and AI within a chatbot that facilitated the attack. But the types of things you would do about it would be fairly similar. So again, it's another good example of an AI breach that really could be just classified alongside the other types of application security risks that you need to think about to defend your business. On the other side of things, picking on an AI application itself, Perplexity is a pretty popular AI-driven browsing application designed for end users. The AI companies themselves are not immune to having vulnerabilities as well and being compromised. So Perplexity's Comet browser was for a period of at least 2 or 3 weeks, I think, after it was discovered, vulnerable to a whole bunch of attacks through embedded prompts, allowing you to exploit private emails and codes. If you browsed to a malicious website with the right context in using the comic browser, it would get the end user to send the person who poisoned the website a whole bunch of emails and secrets off of the desktop. Again, pretty bad. Another issue from a different perspective to try and think about. And again, it's about if you're losing data, the quantification basis would be fines. Maybe it's lost revenue and sales due to the disruption of needing to take these applications down while you fix them, investigate the issue. There's an operational cost element there. Maybe you need some third-party help to try and clean up and remediate the issue. This is the kinds of things that you would be thinking about from an impact, as well as obviously reputational damage. Customer-facing AI can be quite kind of high profile and pretty obvious when you've had an issue that's being exploited. And then the last of the kind of four scenarios to go through and kind of frame the examples here. I've got two. So Zscaler, we're using SalesLoft. So obviously SalesLoft is the third-party partner. Zscaler suffered the breach, so it's classic supply chain compromise. The SalesLoft AI that they were using had a number of vulnerabilities in it that allowed other malicious users to be able to access Zscaler's data through some simple OAuth vulnerabilities within the SalesLoft application. So, this is again, it's a similar kind of context to the last example, in that AI clearly has vulnerabilities within it from an application security perspective that it shouldn't have. But at this time, it's not systems that you directly control; it's your supplier. So you should be thinking, a little bit about how you are validating the suppliers that you've got that actually use AI in their applications. Something like this is quite visible and probably is a paid feature that's being adopted, but there's a whole ton of AI within a lot of SaaS applications now that isn't a pay feature. It's there whether you, as part of a standard user plan. How confident are you that they've got the right governance around how they're developing and implementing the AI, and how you would understand whether there was a problem with it, your right to test it, your right to request auditing data, that kind of thing. And then last but not least, on the other side of things, again, picking on another big AI vendor, Anthropic, which is probably the AI talk of the month in terms of how Claude is the future of business desktop and developer interactions. So Claude had a pretty significant outage in September of last year that rendered all of the users of the Claude Anthropic platform unable to use it. So this is a different take. It's not the AI within your supply chain that's been compromised. It's actually the AI applications that become a bit fundamental to how your business operates. What happens when they get an outage? Again, you could be treating this like any other temporary loss of a supplier risk, but maybe given the level of dependency that your organization might have on a supplier like Anthropic, maybe you've moved all development activity over to using Claude Code. The criticality of this supplier and the criticality of the AI capabilities that they're providing, either as a desktop application or maybe an API through some third party like ChatGPT, maybe that would be where you would be considering how to look at this risk. So bringing this kind of back together, those are four examples. They may or may not be relevant to your organizations. You may want to break them down further, but hopefully giving you a bit of a flavor of how you would look at the macro level risk and the impact that it faces. Kind of going on now to bring this together in terms of how you would quantify this back into pounds or dollars or euros, depending on where you are in the world. So just to kind of recap, why would we advocate to quantify these risks? You could easily say, okay, I've got four risks. One of them's high impact. One of them's a medium level of likelihood, and the next one is maybe medium impact. I mean, that's great. You can put them on a list and you can rank them by highs and mediums. It's very, very difficult to communicate that well. One of one of the kind of key studies from the 1990s around how different people perceive the difference in, if I tell you that something is likely, and you're asked to put a percentage on that, is likely to you 80% or 50% or 60%. The range in the studies likely range from about 40% to about 95%, depending on the person listening. Very, very, very difficult to communicate that constructively to a varied audience that maybe has various different levels of interest in the topic. So bringing things back to pounds and dollars kind of levels the playing field, and also allows you to sit risks a bit better alongside each other, and you don't end up with the problem in risk management that many people face, that everything becomes a medium, a 3 on a 5-point scale, or a 4 on a 5-point scale if it's a little bit more significant. So quantifying risk in pounds and euros, it aligns it to the language of the business. It makes it easier to communicate, what's going on, what is this risk, what is the impact of this risk in pounds, and what is the impact of doing something about it from a security control perspective. The other thing that this allows you to do in a way that's better than qualitative methods is to be able to put all of your risks together. So if you've got 4 or 5 AI cyber risks, you can do an assessment on those 4 or 5 risks, and you can give a total amount of potential loss that might come from those risks. You can sum them up in a way that, adding 2 reds, 3 ambers and 4 greens together is not really going to do for you in a qualitative approach. And also it gives you a better comparable basis over time to external events and impacts. Obviously, the impact to your business will change. The basis of impact may always be revenue on something like, for example, an AI facilitated compromise of your external facing application. You've got to take it down for a period of time. It's going to impact your revenue, but the impact to your revenue might vary as your company grows over time. So being able to keep the basis of quantification the same whilst you change the revenue year on year. This year, we're doing 10 million of revenue. Next year we're doing 50 million of revenue. 10% of that revenue could be lost from this risk. Allows you to kind of see demonstrably what that would be differently at different points in time without changing the basis of your risk assessment. So there's a lot of good reasons why bringing this back to a quantitative approach would actually make it easier to communicate, to track, and to understand the totality of risks within a particular category. So working through that on one of our examples. So this risk scenario, compromise of a customer-facing AI application, one of the ones that we just went through. So the description of the risk, when you're bringing it down to kind of validate it's a risk, cyber criminals compromise the AI within a customer-facing application to steal sensitive customer data. One of the things that we would believe makes this a risk is that it has a source, cyber criminals. There's an event, compromise within your application, and there's a compromise, stealing customer data. A lot of people confuse control failures and other things with risks. Our view is if you can anchor it around those 3 things, then you've got a real risk that you can look at, rather than we've not adequately penetration tested our AI application, and therefore it might have a vulnerability in it. More like a control failure or an ineffective process than an actual risk, because there's no perpetrator in that example. So working through this, if we were doing this with a customer, we would be thinking about, okay, what are the impacts that we would want to quantify? Data theft. So what's the cost per compromised customer record if that data was stolen? Would it disrupt operations while we took the application down, investigated how it was compromised and fixed it? So what would be our annual revenue divided by our disruption time might be a way to do that. How would we fix the issue? So what's the number of sprints on average to fix applications, bugs of a critical nature? What's our release cycle cost? Might be a way to quantify fixing the issue. You can add internal cost of investigation. You can add calling out external incident response. Maybe there's a there's a distribution of your annual retainer fee and a cost per day for incident response charges. So those would be the pieces that you might think of. The way you would break it down, because that's quite a lot of things, and some of them the data is easier or harder to get. What is the primary impact of this risk would be where you would start. So for if the primary impact is stealing customer data, then data theft, cost per record of compromised records would be the primary impact. The others would be secondary. Maybe you would start with quantifying primary impact and adding the others over time as you gathered data and wanted to refine the risk. It's also important from an impact perspective to think about a range. Most risks will manifest significantly in a range. So maybe going back to a more traditional example like ransomware, thinking about the existential event, the Maersk, I need to replace all my IT, is one end of a ransomware impact. But it's also equally as important to think about the significant operational disruption from maybe a handful of machines that have been encrypted within your organization, and looking at the range of impacts in that. Monte Carlo simulation as an approach to risk quantification, not the only one, but one of them, helps you understand those impact ranges. It also helps you when you're thinking in ranges to have something that's imprecise to start with, and refine your impacts over time as you get more data from real incidents and peers within your industry reports and that kind of thing. And then on the likelihood side of things, as I say, the best data source would be real incident data from your organization or similar organizations, or a regulator if you're in a regulated business. But failing that, the proxy would be to go out and look at reputable sources out there in the wider world. That's what we use in our consulting business for as a good external validation of the view that we've got on likelihoods. You might start with a primary data source like the IBM report that we quoted at the beginning of this webinar, where they'll quote something like 5 to 25% is the average likelihood of a data breach of any customer application. Then when you look at AI, 13% of those breaches would involve AI. You can extrapolate that down to, therefore there's a 1 to 4% chance of an annualized AI cyber breach. Not a big likelihood, but maybe the impact is significant, and therefore it's worth tracking. Maybe it's not when you've gone through this thinking process, and it's a risk that you don't take any further and discard. It's entirely up to you. But this is the kind of process that you would follow. Maybe you'd use Monte Carlo as a simulation model on this. Maybe you would additionally gather other data points for other methods of doing quant. But this would give you a good, sensible basis to do a quantification. And I think simpler and more straightforward looking at impact and likelihood will give you a good answer, rather than maybe some of the more involved methods of doing quant that are out there today. The other thing that if you take this kind of approach to quantification and do a Monte Carlo simulation on those two types of data points, you can end up with a nice curve picture like this that gives you the distribution of risk from probability and amount of loss. This gives you that range of the kind of existential to the everyday, and the probability of losing those amounts of money on an annualized basis. So this is what we would call a loss exceedance curve, and it gives you a 50% chance of losing about £100,000 a year to the risks that are modelled under the curve, all the way down to a very small percentage chance of losing 10 million on an annualized basis. So if I was looking at this in terms of what should I be thinking about in terms of budgeting for loss, cybersecurity materialized breaches would be a loss that you would need to be able to accommodate within the resources of your company, in the same way that you would need to accommodate lost and broken laptops from an IT perspective. You would be thinking, well, I need to be budgeting somewhere between 100k and 1 million, and having resources to be able to do more, but that's an unlikely event for us. And then you can plot that against your risk appetite and your affordability. You can also stack, as you can see in the other embedded image here. Maybe it's a little bit blurry on this webinar format. Is we've got 5 AI cyber risks here that we've quantified. So actually, this curve is the sum of all of our AI cyber risks. So we can have a nice clear view here of what is the AI cyber risk to this business, separate to maybe other risk scenarios as well. Much easier to communicate in pounds and dollars, you know, if you also then go further and add the security controls to this, you can look at the quantified reduction in risk against each of these scenarios individually or in totality as well. So, you know, bearing all of that in mind, one of the things that I thought we would kind of finish on with this webinar, hopefully while you mull over whether those risks are significant enough to start modeling in your own organizations, is, you know, a few kind of takeaways to kind of think about your resilience against those attacks, and feed those into the risk assessment process that maybe you would start to adopt. So, you know, from an AI-driven cyber attack perspective, you know, if AI is facilitating a speed up in cyber attacks, are your defenses from a detective perspective fast enough to be able to keep up with a change in the pace of the attack? Would you know if someone was using internal AI to search for API keys or sensitive data? So how do you know who is using your internal AI, and would you again be able to detect that quickly? From a shadow internal AI data leakage perspective, you know, can your users use your choice of AI or theirs? How easy is it for people to sign up to Comet Perplexity within your organization and start putting, you know, internal documents or code into them? You know, can they install random browser extensions? There's a plethora of browser extensions today, not just applications that can ask AI to give me a view on this page or whatever. When a lot of your internal applications are delivered via the browser, it's another key kind of channel for leaking data into AI, not just uploading documents into an AI chat. You know, from your customer-facing applications, do you explicitly test your AI against common cyber attacks? How critical is AI to the operation of your customer applications? You know, is it a nice to have at the moment that you could turn off, and you know, there'd be some disruption to the customer experience, but you wouldn't need to turn off your entire customer-facing e-commerce application in a way that would impact your revenue? You know, that would have a big difference in terms of how you would be looking at quantifying the impacts of that kind of risk manifesting. And then from a supply chain perspective, you know, have you added use of AI where and how the data is processed to your third-party assurance? A lot of AI at the moment, particularly in the kind of smaller companies that are providing SaaS applications, is just a pipeline to a public model in maybe OpenAI or Google. Do you know where that data is going to be processed, even within legitimate applications you've got? If you've got the requirement from your customers, or by the nature of the business that you've got, for data to be processed only in a certain region, are you checking that the AI that's doing that processing at the back end of those groovy SaaS applications is actually doing it within the region that you expected it to, or sending it somewhere completely different? And that's completely on top of is your data being used to train third-party models because your third-party supplier doesn't have the right licensing of that AI to prevent that from happening? So, you know, think about those kinds of things. If you start to think about assessing these risks, we've got a lot more guidance than this than I can fit in to a 40-minute presentation. But hopefully this gives you enough food for thought to start to kind of give this topic a bit more thought. And if you already have, then be super happy and interested to learn what you've been up to and the differences in the types of risks that you've been looking at and quantifying if it varies significantly from the types of things that I've talked about here today. And then all that's left to say is thank you very much for your time and attention. I think we're about 45 minutes in now, and we've got a little bit of time for some questions if anybody wants to ask them or give any feedback on the presentation. And please don't be shy. Okay. Just give everybody a minute or two. Okay, I've got one question so far. How do you convert AI risk into an impact the board can understand? Well, I guess that really brings it back to the kind of point I was making there about turning it into pounds or euros or dollars or whatever. I mean, most cybersecurity discussions at board or senior management level, really the people that are requiring those briefings from the CISO or the cybersecurity leader, they don't really want to understand the nitty gritty of cybersecurity acronyms and things. What they're really thinking about is allocation of resources to either grow their top line or defend their bottom line from cost creep. So if you can convert AI risk into a financial return on investment based discussion. So, for example, this cyber risk has a 90% chance of costing us £1 million a year, and it's going to cost us £100,000 to do something about it. That can be aligned alongside a proposal maybe to grow the top line of, I'll grow the top line by £500,000 a year, but I need £300,000 to do something about growing the top line. Immediately the equation then balances in the favor of the cybersecurity investment to defend the bottom line, and you're having a bit of a like for like conversation. So I mean that's probably the principal way, but there are lots of ways that communicating in financial terms is a much better way to help non-cyber people understand risks and the impact to your business. Second question. What is your top tip for an early stage startup to get the foundations correct from the start? Good question. Thank you, Sarah Timms. I think no matter how early you are, and Cydea is a small company, and I've worked in other startups as well as large organizations. Understanding your risks and what they would mean to your business from a cost or even an existential threat basis. I think you can do that even in an early stage startup. I think one of the main benefits from having a good handle on your own risks is that typically most startups sell to larger organizations. They've got onboarding processes now for their suppliers that include having control of cybersecurity and risk management. So getting that view in a way that feels robust and well thought out can have a big benefit in terms of building trust in your organization. I think in terms of how you would start doing cyber risk management as a startup without some Death Star GRC program and 10 people to operate it, is just, taking a step back, thinking about, what are the top 5 to 10 key cyber risks that your business would face. They're not infinitely variable. They would typically be revolving around ransomware, around data breaches, around outage of critical suppliers from an availability perspective, and not trying to capture every single minutiae, but having a good stab at that 5 to 10 top risks, and following a simple quantification process like Monte Carlo to be able to do something about quantifying what those risks might mean. And I guess if your question is a little bit around, well, we don't have a lot of revenue, maybe the impact would be much more around inability to create sales and capitalize on sales because you don't have your sales apparatus available, or you've lost customer confidence or something like that. All of these things can be quantified, and I think, a bit of a shameless plug for the Cydea risk platform. We've built our platform for smaller organizations who don't have large GRC teams to be able to, if you've got an idea of your scenarios or you want to take inspiration from the library of content that we've built, it helps get you going without having to be an expert practitioner in cyber or cyber risk quantification. Next question. What information touch points do you look at to quantify cyber risks adequately, and does Cydea store the information we provide? So if you mean by the Cydea risk platform rather than the consulting that we do, so the touch points that we look at from your business would be things like your revenue, your number of staff, number of customer data records, what's your cyber insurance policy look like from a control perspective, and you would, if you license our platform, provide that data and use it in combination with the scenarios that we've defined, or scenarios that you define yourself, to build risk quantification formulas and manage your risks. That information, as per any other SaaS application, would be stored within our application. If you are working with Cydea from a consultancy perspective, obviously we'd be gathering a similar information, but we might be storing that within your own existing GRC platform or tooling that you want to use to manage risks, or we would be capturing it within our platform and providing that to you in a report, and obviously only keeping your data for the time that it was necessary to do so. So it varies a little bit, but those are the types of information that we gather. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, maybe there's one more. Somebody's still typing. Or maybe there's at least two more questions coming, so I'll give them a minute to finish. Abdul and Jason look like they're furiously typing in my chat box. Hopefully these are not long or difficult questions. Maybe I should add while we're waiting for those questions. Obviously, it says it on the screen, but if you want to know more about cyber risk management and quantification, please check out our website. We've got a really good and rich series of blog posts that we've done about this and other topical cyber issues. And if you want to see how we use our approach within the platform that we built, everybody gets a 30-day free trial of the Cydea Risk app. You can literally just sign up yourself and have a free trial and give us some feedback. Okay. So some of them are not questions. Abdul says, thank you very much. Thanks, Abdul. Deetlef says, thanks. Jason, he said, please could you repeat the last answer about the information's gathered? Jason, so we gather a whole range of information, and it would depend on the organization and the risks. But by default, a lot of cyber risks will be quantified around revenue. So understanding the business's revenue would be part of that. Are quantified around the cost of data breaches and losing information. So understanding how many personal records and that you gather would be part of that. Understanding what the premiums and excesses of your cyber insurance, for example, would help us with the quantification of some of the controls that you've got. There's a whole ton of information that we would gather. If you want to go through that in a bit more detail, very happy to follow up that with you. But some of that is dependent on the risk scenarios that you want to put into the platform, and some of it is dependent on the information that you want to share. All of it is elective by users of our platform, the same as it's elective when we're doing consulting risk assessments. None of it is needed to make a start. All of it is needed to fully quantify all of the risks that you might face. Okay, so I think that might be the end of the questions, and hopefully my quick skip through AI cyber risks has been useful. And as I say, love to follow up and get some insights from any of you in slower time. And thank you very much, and hopefully you'll come to future webinars. We plan to do quite a lot more of these in the future around topical risk management topics. Thank you very much. Have a great day.